Hey everybody, so I wanted to, as promised, post a video to mostly go into your midterm essays, which are coming up. They are due on March 13th, which is a Friday by 5 p.m. So I want to review for you the expectations for that essay and alert you to the fact that prompts for that particular essay have now been posted under the assignments tab. So you can go read through. There's 4 potential prompts that you can choose from that identify different themes that we have looked at thus far in the semester. And it goes through the fairy tales that we will be reading and discussing throughout the course of this upcoming week. So those are also par for the course for you to use and draw from when writing these essays. Something that I want to note, if you want to pursue a topic outside of the prompts that I've given you, some people work really well with specific parameters and they need direction and they need a question. And other people, don't need as much direction. If you have been interested in a group of texts or interested in pursuing a theme or a subject that I am not covering in the prompts, that is totally fine. I think you will always write more compelling, interesting essays if you're writing on something that you are invested in and interested in. So if you want to write on a prompt that is not one of the 4 that I've given you, just reach out to me now, basically. Let me know what your ideas are, just so that I can make sure that you're on the right track and that you have a clear sort of focus in mind. So be in touch with me ASAP if you want to pursue a different subject. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to just briefly review the prompts, and then I want to go into more specifics about guidelines, the paper guidelines for your midterm, and really it applies for your final as well. Underneath modules, you will see for our upcoming writing week, which is not this week, but the following week, we will not be reading anything new. The goal of this is not to give you a vacation before spring break, but actually to give you some focused time to work on these essays. Writing is a process for all of you, those of you who've taken XPOS, you know this. It's about drafting, it's about revising, it's about reconsidering your work. And so I wanted to give you a couple of days at the least to be able to actually work on your essays in a really sort of concentrated, focused way. During that week, we will also I'll be sort of offering you all the opportunity to participate in a sort of thesis workshop. Our thesis is, of course, the sort of anchor for our essay. And so getting some feedback earlier in the week on, on how productive your thesis looks in order to ground that essay, I think will be useful. I will give you feedback. Your fellow classmates will give you some feedback, and hopefully that will help you feel more confident, more situated in the argument that you are making in your midterm papers. So let's just look at some of the prompts. I just want to identify some of the subjects that I've highlighted for you all. And I've given you some suggestions of text that you can put into conversation with one another. This is a nice way actually to think about how to approach these formal papers. Think about putting the text that we have read into some sort of critical dialogue with one another based on a given theme, okay? Your goal in the midterm papers is going to be to examine at least 2, but no more than 3 texts that we've read thus far in the semester to do this sort of comparative critical analysis based on the prompt that you choose. So the goal is not to take on the entirety of all of the texts that we've read. You wouldn't write a very detailed and persuasive and critically engaged essay if you had to cover so many different myths, so many different stories. But rather, if you look at 2 and really no more than three in context with one another, that's when you can start to do some really interesting critical analysis by putting these texts into some sort of conversation with one another. So think about it from that perspective. I think that will be useful. So one of your prompts, we've talked a lot about how one of the vital elements of myths is to communicate some kind of moral message, to provide a culture, to provide its readers with some sort of moral guidance, guidelines to ensure a sort of healthy, functioning society. And so your first prompt asks you to look at just that, to compare and contrast the moral lessons in two and no more than three texts that we've read thus far. When we get to the fairy tales this week, you'll see that morality and a moral root is really a fundamental element of fairy tales, right? There's a real teaching element in fairy tales, which is why they are now have evolved to be a genre that is directed towards children. It's useful in this particular way. That is its use value. So you could look at some of the fairy tales that we're going to be reading. We're going to be reading from three different traditions: Germanic, French, and we're going to be doing a more modern feminist retelling of certain fairy tales. So you could look at you could choose two or three fairy tales to look at from the different traditions, from the different cultural backgrounds. You could put them in conversation with one another. You could look at a fairy tale in conversation with perhaps one of Song Ling's stories. You could look at any of the texts you could look at Yellow Woman if you wanted to. So you could really, or Bacchae, you could certainly put a bunch of different texts in conversation with one another to think about the ways in which the moral roots of these stories are guiding the plots and also kind of interacting with one another based on your awareness of each individual text's social, cultural, historical background and context. And that's where having the video lecture notes and written lecture notes, or some of the notes that we have read, some of the scholarly notes that we've read before we've read certain pieces, such as Yellow Woman, such as Bacchae, the Paul Woodruff introduction, that will give you some of that background in order to help you guide your analysis. Remember, like, none of these texts are written in a vacuum. They all have been produced by a particular vantage point, by a particular orientation in terms of, again, the historical, cultural, political, social roots, so and influences. So it is critical, considering this is a comparative literature course, to take stock of these influences when you are putting these texts into conversation with one another. So be mindful of that in particular as you approach this essay. So you can look at the morality and the use value of certain stories that we've read thus far. Another option for you is to look at, we've also talked a lot about female power, female agency, or the lack of, right? How it's compromised in certain texts under certain patriarchal constructs. And so you could look at the ways in which female agency is promoted or barred or compromised in some way. I would define what you mean by female agency in power. Are you looking at it from a sexual perspective, an emotional perspective, physical, social? You could take on a few of these too, but I would be clear about the type that you're trying to engage. I think that will help focus that particular essay. You can look at the ways in which these female protagonists that we've seen in Song Ling stories compare with the Bacchants in Bacchae. You could look at some of the characters in the fairy tales from the Grimm's version, from Carter's version that we're going to be reading, the more modern feminist retelling of Little Red Riding Hood. So there, you could look at Yellow Woman, of course. So there's also a lot of different options to examine when you're dealing with the theme of female power, okay, and agency. You could also look at, and many of you actually have already started this process in your short writing assignments. You could look at the theme of madness, or that duality between madness and reason in some of the stories that we've read thus far. If you have taken that on in your short writing assignment, you may have seen me comment in my commentary to you that like this is a good start if you want to then expand upon this theme and parlay it into a midterm essay by taking on some of the work that you've done and looking at it in contrast to another one of the texts that we've read thus far this semester. So you could really try to ask yourself how madness is defined in a particular time period and culture. And you could also consider whether or not you think certain characters are mad, or how madness is contextualized in these different stories. So you could consider Bacchae, you can consider some of the characters or one or two stories in Strange Tales from a Chinese studio. You could look at Yellow Woman, you could look at The Red Convertible by Erdrich that we are going to be finishing our conversation on tomorrow night. So again, a couple of different options to examine that theme. And then the final one is more of looking at some of the formal elements of the act of storytelling as a means of promoting the plots of these various stories or plays. So you could look at certain formal elements like repetition, like cyclicality, foreshadowing, poetic language, brevity, dialogue. You could take maybe 2 or even 3 of those particular formal elements and really do a deep dive into how they are functioning in these particular myths, and how they are actually helping to move the respective plots along in the respective texts. So these are some of the options that you have for your midterm essays. Again, if you want to pursue a subject that is not covered, you can, as long as you talk to me in advance. Okay, so there is a specific document under modules called paper guidelines, and it really is a sort of like do and don't for these essays. So for your midterm, you're going to be writing a 3 to 5 page essay, double spaced, MLA citation. And again, you should be examining 2 and no more than 3 texts when you are doing this critical comparative analysis. You importantly should have a clear thesis for your essay, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But your thesis is basically your roadmap for your essay. It is where you tell your reader precisely what your argument is and the specific points that you intend to argue in your essay in order to persuade your reader to see your perspective, to see your point of view. So the thesis is, or it should be original. It should represent your own independent thinking, and it should move beyond just some sort of observational statement. And what I mean by that is just, madness can be seen in Euripides' Bacchae and Louise Erdrich's The Red Convertible. And, right, that's more of an observation than an actual formalized argument that you're making. How is madness presented in these 2 texts? How does madness sort of align in these 2 texts in terms of their presentations? Where do they contrast to one another? And more importantly, why does it matter? Why is it important? Right? That is a way to then move a sort of observational statement into more of a critical argument that will guide your analysis throughout the rest of your essay. Okay, so it should have a clear thesis, and that thesis typically comes in your introduction. In your introduction, you should also introduce, obviously, the text that you're going to be writing about, so the authors, the actual formal titles of each of the texts that you're going to be engaging, and you should also consider noting the particular backgrounds of these texts. Again, they were not written in a vacuum, so identifying where they come from historically and culturally politically even, is really sort of important and will help to uh, allow your analysis to be more nuanced, which is really, really critical for these types of comparative essays in a comparative literature course. Um, you should have, 2 to 3 body paragraphs, I would say. And you should identify a new idea in each body paragraph. You should have a clear topic sentence at the beginning of each of your body paragraphs that basically tells the reader what you intend to discuss in each of those body paragraphs as a way of developing and showcasing your argument. Okay? It's also a way for you to make sure that you're not being repetitive in your thinking. If you have clear topic sentences that are distinct from one another and are introducing individual ideas, though those ideas are intended to support your ultimate argument, that will help you make sure that, again, you are avoiding redundancy or repetition and indeed building an argument throughout your essay. You should, in each of your body paragraphs should engage all of the text that you are discussing. Okay, and what I mean by that is you should not have body paragraph number 1 about Bacchae, body paragraph number 2 about Yellow Woman, and maybe a third body paragraph that starts to do a little bit of comparative analytical work between the two of them. Each of your body paragraphs should engage either the 2 texts that you're going to be discussing or the 3 texts that you're going to be discussing. They should actually all be comparative and connective in nature. All right, that's important. You also, of course, want to, how do we build an argument, right? How do we showcase our ideas clearly and persuasively? We use the text, right? We use well-chosen quotes from the text in order to substantiate and showcase our ideas. We make a point, we showcase that point in the actual text, and then we do something after that, which is we engage the text, right? We respond to it in some way. We demonstrate our own critical thinking in unpacking that text. Why is this quote useful here? Why is this quote productive? How is it helping you to develop your own independent thinking? And how then can you turn that analysis to a comparison to another text, right? So make sure that you are drawing at least, I would say, 1 quote per text for each body paragraph. So if you're engaging 2 stories, you want to have 1 quote for each story in each body paragraph. If you're using 3, same gig, 3 quotes per body paragraph in order to balance, right, your thinking between all of the texts. You don't want to just be writing more on one and then kind of turning your attention really quickly in a line or 2 to another at the end. That isn't really thinking connectively and comparatively in the sort of balanced, sustained way that you should in your body paragraphs. You should also have a clear and distinct conclusion. Your conclusion is really the place where you, like I like to say to my XPOS students, your conclusion echoes your intro. Your conclusion is a way to basically reaffirm the ideas that you set forth in your introduction. It is to restate, right, your argument, what your thesis was for this essay. It's a way to kind of come full circle in your essay, right, where your thesis and your introduction sort of tells the reader what you intend to do in your essay. Your conclusion should echo that. Here's what I did in my essay, essentially. Reaffirm the ideas that you set forth in your introduction. And that is the sort of basic structure of how to compose this type of critical analytical essay. For those of you who are English majors in this class, you are well versed in this already, but it's still good to sort of go over and be clear on what the expectations are. Okay, so under modules, again, you will see paper guidelines. It also has some formatting guidelines. We're not doing anything fancy here. It's double space, it's 12-point font, it's 1-inch margins. We're using MLA citation. You should have your own independent works cited page that should come, and that does not count towards your 3 to 5 pages. So if you have 2 pages and a works cited page, that's not enough. You should be adhering to MLA guidelines. There are links under the modules also to MLA resources, one from Rutgers, one from Purdue University, the OWL Purdue University site. So if you have questions about how to cite appropriately, you can utilize those resources. You can also email me at any time just to clarify or make sure that you're on the right track. And then there's also another document that is like a paper writing 101 that goes into even more detail about the elements of this type of a formal essay and exactly how to approach them. And again, like what is expected of you. I would review those documents in detail so that you, again, are clear on what the expectations are. And do it soon so that you can actually email me or be in touch with me in advance if you do have any lingering questions about the midterm essay. I am offering, as I said in one of my previous announcements, I'm offering some on-campus office hours. I could even stay a little bit on Thursday of this week. I am going to be seeing some students on Monday, the 9th of next week. If you want some time with me in person, I'm on College Ave campus. Just email me with whatever time works, and I'll see based on my schedule thus far where I can fit you in. If you still want to have if you can't make it to campus, and I know some of you cannot, and that's fine. If you still want to have a discussion with me, some kind of dialogue with me about your essays, but can't make it to campus, just be in touch with me. We could probably set up a time to Skype or FaceTime or something so that you feel confident and ready to go for these midterm essays. Two last announcements. One, I'm extending our conversation, our discussion forum on Erdrich until tomorrow evening, Monday evening at 9 p.m. since something got messed up in Canvas and the questions for the Erdrich piece never posted on time. So I'm going to give you a little bit extra time to respond to that text. And then we are going to be starting our forum on the fairy tales. I'm going to post those questions tomorrow morning as per usual anyway, just so that they are there and you can turn to them after you're done with the Erdrich discussion forum. So that's the first thing. The second thing is you should all have received back grades and commentary on your short writing assignment, your first short writing assignment. I'm going to be posting 1 or 2 samples of student work so that you have models to look at and to use as guides for future short writing assignments. I think that will be helpful just to look at a specific example that received a high grade. So again, you know exactly what is expected of you. These essays were, they were good. And like I said, for some of you, they're going to be a really good start to potentially even thinking about how to expand what you've already started thinking about into your midterm essays if you decide to go with the madness versus reason route. I think that is it for me. If you have any questions for me, please be in touch at any time. And yeah, onward. Here we are, almost at spring break. We're almost at spring break, guys. Yes. Well, you guys will enjoy spring break. I will be grading your essays, but you guys get the break, so that's good. That's good. I'm jealous. I'm a little jelly. All right. I will be back in touch soon. Okay. Bye.